So what happened after Australia, John?
Well, again, it was the developments at the head office. I was actually completed. I was there 3 years in total from first going out, but I completed the contract I had, and I decided I didn't want to stay out in Australia. That's another story. I was offered a job outside of the industry and so on, but I thought long and hard, or short but hard, and decided to come back. But at that particular time, I was lucky to avoid the early 70s, really, in England, 3-day week and all that rubbish that we went through. So when I came back, it was 1976 by this time, and at that time too, a chap called Ian Phillips, a very bright man, was the managing director of Raleigh, and they had decided to separate Sturmey-Archer from Raleigh. And funnily enough, I was telephoned in Australia, a chap called Bob Forsyth, and said, John, we'd like you to head up, be the export director of Sturmey-Archer. And I'd worked with Ray Bakewell, I liked him, I got to know a bit about it, I'd known some markets from then, and I thought, this is clever. And I saw, when I started in life, Sturmey-Archer was the big guys, Shimano were the little guys. And I'd seen Shimano creeping higher and higher and higher. And I thought to myself, I wouldn't have a go getting back at these bloody Japs. My parents had fought them, and I thought it was my destiny to fight them too. So subjective comments thoughts like that I kept to myself at the time. I thought, that's probably a good idea. And I thought to myself too, and I remember this, it's because it's bugged me the rest of my days, really. I thought, really, what makes a bike? If you look at every bike, or too many bikes, they're coat hangers for Shimano. Shimano's cleverest thing they have ever did is not make a bike. Because a frame and a fork, it's just a coat hanger, and then you can hang all their fancy brakes and lighting sets. Sturmey-Archer made all of those things, brakes, lighting sets, dynamos. And I thought, this is interesting, because actually that side of business is much bigger than the bicycle business, and you're dealing with all of the bicycle business around the world. So I thought, this is interesting. And I thought to myself, this is my destiny. And I went back to work for Sturmey-Archer when Sturmey-Archer was separated from Raleigh under Mike Smith. Mike Smith was made, there was, Tom Barnsley was the managing director of most of my time. It was, after George Wilson was Sandy Roberts. Leslie Roberts, Sandy was his son. Leslie Roberts, who then went to live in South Africa, funnily enough. That's another story, I met him out there. But anyway, then after him was Tom Barnsley, was an accountant, very, very shrewd chap. And under them was a finance guy called Macnaughtan, always called Mac, and his first name now, Macnaughtan, and of course Mike Smith. Now, Mike Smith was running the factories, a very, very strong character, as was Macnaughtan, but totally different. And they would fight, absolutely fight. I mean, despised each other as well, but somehow or other, being very British about it, at the end of the day, they would join each other in the mess and have a pink gin or whatever at lunchtime every day. But back in the boardrooms, it was blood on the floor. But Mike Smith was heading up Sturmey-Archer, and Macnaughtan was retiring, so that fitted Mike Smith's book very well. And I'm trying to remember who the managing director of Raleigh was. I think they got someone from outside, someone like David Ing or someone. I can't remember. But would I join Sturmey-Archer? Anyway, that's what I did. So I was working with I was in charge of exports, and Frank Donnelly, who was a very good man, was in charge of home sales at the time. So poor Frank, he'd come from Hoover, and the commercial director was Bob Forsyth, who was also a Hoover man. Raleigh, by the way, as you probably know, was hoovered in the middle 60s, where they taught us how to sell. Right. I did all my sales training with Hoover people like Dick Thackeray, Bob Forsyth, and anyway. And so I went to work for Bob Forsyth directly, and Mike Smith as the managing director. My equivalent was my counterpart on the home side was Frank Donnelly, exceptional man. I'll tell you a lovely story. And of all things, we had to share a secretary, Miss Vicky Davis, lovely girl. She was about 6 foot tall, very good to look at, pleasing to the eye. And I remember when I arrived, she'd been Frank's secretary solely on the home market. And he used to take her to see the dealers and would dictate to her while he was in the car, and she'd be writing it back. And he was very fluent. He knew how to dictate. I'd never had a personal secretary before, really, and I'd had to do it on a dictating machine and things like that. I certainly didn't type. So Miss Vicky, when I got her, not only she was a local lass and was a lovely girl. She not only disliked foreigners, but used to hate my side of the business. And what's more, this idiot had come who couldn't really dictate a letter fluently. And I remember I used to wait till I had about 20 or 30 letters on my desk to dictate, and then I would say, "Oh, Vicky, would you mind coming in for dictation?" And I would pick up the letter and say, "Dear sir, thank you for your letter," and she would start tapping her pencil on there. And I said, "Do you mind not tapping your pencil?" "Well," she says, "it's like pulling teeth doing your dictation." Frank, of course, was fluent. And I remember the next time, she was right. I remember thinking, God, and I planned all my letters for the next day, and of course had her rattle them off. And to her, she never said a word. She was a very good secretary. She certainly made me work hard, and I had to work hard for her. But I wasn't going to get away with this, either hatred of foreigners or probably of me too. But I was visited on the way back from Australia, although I spent some time in Nigeria, Raleigh, Nigeria. Determined to get my own back on Miss Vicky, I had Mr. Mohammed from Zaria come to visit me, and he'd seen the Raleigh people, but he was coming down to see me, and I knew why he was coming. He was going to buy some Phillips wild-barreled hubs, remarkable hubs, and I knew where I was going to get a good order for him, and I roughly knew how the meeting was going to go. So I called in Miss Vicky, and I said, "Oh, Vicky, I'd like you to meet Mohammed, and I want you also to take notes of our meeting." I didn't need to have her there. And she said, "But would you like to get a cup of tea first?" Well, the funny thing was that we sat down, and again, him in his flowing robes, his tea arrived, and this is also, she was there with her book to take notes. He proceeded to drink his tea from his teaspoon, like this, you see, and I saw her face. Oh, bloody foreigner. Well, I couldn't resist it, so I poured my tea into my saucer and started drinking it out of the saucer. It was just for her benefit. And because Mohammed didn't flicker, and I was reveling in this. And then he bought 50,000, and I'm not exaggerating, 50,000 Phillips hubs.
Wow.
From me. And I said to him, "Now, Mr. Mohammed said, regarding payment." And he said, "Will you accept cash?" And I said, "Yes, of any hard currency. I can't take Naira, but any hard currency." And I said, "But this is why I've got Miss Vicky in. Is it all right to pay her?" And he said, "Yes, certainly." I said, "Now?" And I knew why he was. And I said, "Yes." I said, "Don't worry." I said, "Miss Vicky's, knows her stuff." And of course, he wound up his robes, and there, strapped to his leg, was about, I can't remember the amount now, but about £30,000 all strapped, and she did not enjoy having to count this money that had been slapped on these big, black, sweaty legs. One up to me. In all, you won't believe this, 27 years working for Sturmey-Archer. It was terrible. I remember Mike Smith was there from 1976, I think we started. I came at the end of 76, back from Australia, till 1983. He retired then, and they did a complete reorganisation. In that time, too, in those years, Raleigh, I can't remember turnovers, you'd probably get this from your records better than me, but Raleigh accounted for some 70%, I would say, of Sturmey-Archer's turnover. Right. So, from memory, we were doing over £100 million turnover when I arrived. I think this is the sort of order of things. And I was doing about, I don't know, maybe 30 million for export, which was I was responsible for. Frank Donnelly was responsible for the Raleigh account, and also UK sales, which accounted for 70% of it. So he was the big cheese. By 1983, two things happened. Raleigh, once again, wasn't going that well, for several reasons. Oh yes, and Ian Phillips, whom I thought the world of, actually, I think he also retired around then, and they'd had another reorganisation. Mike Smith retired, and he was replaced by someone in TI, Tony Rogers. It was upsetting for me, that. And Frank Donnelly was retiring. Bob Forsyth, my direct boss, had actually died in office. Another story. And so under the reorganisation, I, of course, was hoping at the time they were going to divide the factory up from the commerce. So what was going to happen, they were running commercially, and we would then be able to buy from the factory. At the 12th hour, they decided that they wouldn't do that, and so they brought in Tony Rogers, who was a super chap from T.I. Reynolds, actually, and he was managing director of Reynolds, and he came in for a very short period, and they then, for whatever reason, he didn't stay, but they then decided not to separate it, so I didn't get the big job of running commercially the whole of Sturmey-Archer, but Peter Wittering was an engineer, and he was put in charge as managing director in 1983-4 of Sturmey-Archer. And we had 2 or 3 people of Raleigh. David Ing definitely came in. There was a shop made until eventually actually Sandy Roberts became managing director about 1985. But when it was a different company really then, it was the true division. It was like a civil war almost too. It became a little nasty because a lot of little things happened. I mean, one, just to illustrate a point, when I remember that we made these burners, they were called BMX type bikes, and they had on the crossbar padded things to stop you getting hurt. And the stitches, we had 20 stitches down in Brooks factory in Smethwick, and I remember I was put in charge then of I was made the sales and marketing director, and one of the first jobs I had was, of course, was to hold the Raleigh business. Now it had gone down from 70 million to 50 million of the 70 I think was Raleigh, and I think it whittled down to about 15 million. It's terribly sad. And anyway, I was told that goes no lower. You know, we've got to keep our turnover at 30 million, and Raleigh is now 40% of our business, or 30%, and we want to keep it that way. And I was losing this, and I was sent down. Peter Wittering he said, "You keep this business." And I went to see my counterpart there, and they said, "Well, we've placed this Taiwan. We can get it cheaper than we can buy from you." So I said, "Well, what's the price from Taiwan?" So I was told the price, and I remember Peter Wittering went livid at me, and I said, "Well, you know, they can get them for 10p from Taiwan, and our full factory cost is, 11p, so they're going to lose the business." And he said, "Well, you can bloody well go down there and make those 20 girls redundant." I mean, yeah, seriously. So I mean, anyway, I'd faced all sorts of other problems in my life, but it, funnily enough, was very unpleasant, as you expect. But in those days, you became accustomed to making redundancies. It sounds awful today, even, but you recall those times. So I remember going down to these girls, and I said, "Look, ladies, I'm very sorry to tell you that 95% of what you make goes to Raleigh, and they can get them cheaper." And the girls all said, "Well, have we lost the business?" And I said, "Well, effectively," I said, "our cost is higher than their price from Taiwan." So they said, "Well, can you give us let's talk together." Those girls had a chat. Now, they were paid peanuts. They had a chat. I remember going away and having a superb lunch in Birmingham. Lunches in Birmingham are much better than Nottingham. And I remember coming back to see the superintendent of the girls there. They said, "Mr. Macnaughtan, we've decided we want to keep our jobs, and we're prepared to take a cut in salary to hold it." So I went back and I said, I felt terrible because I thought their salary was appalling anyway, and they took, I can't remember the amount, but it wasn't 5 or 6%. It was a significant cut, 15-20% perhaps, but it was significant. And I remember, and I said, "Well, look, I'll come back to see you." And I went to back, and I said, "Well," to Peter, I said, "You've asked me to make me redundant." I was going to, but this was the reaction I got. And I mean, he gave me a bollocking. He just turned around and said, "Yes, this is the type of workforce we've got here." And he said, "It's people like you don't appreciate it. You jolly well keep our business. We've got good people here, and we've got to employ them. Blah, blah, blah. You go back to Raleigh and, hit him on the nose." And I went back to see Raleigh, and I said, "We'll match the price." I'd worked out what the import duties were and so on and so on. And I said, "We'll match the price." "Well, I'm not going to change it now for matching the price." So I then agreed. We went under the price by a little bit, and I got the business. 6 months later, Taiwanese reduced their prices, and we made 20 girls redundant. There were so many stories like that at that time. Closing the Philips factories, they made the roller lever brakes. If only they had them now. Making all the beautiful brakes that they did make. There'd just been no investment though, and of course they were being beaten by Li-Chi and all that. But not because they weren't clever. Some of the Philips and Hercules designs were jolly good, and it had the investment put in that. However, So, we had to let go. I can't remember. I mean, I think there were 2,000 people were originally down in the Phillips and Hercules factories. And we had to let go however many were left of that, made redundant. And I remember it was Gordon Nixon. I don't know if you've heard of Gordon Nixon. He's an exceptional man. He's totally blind, went blind at the age of 12 with a genetic... And he was the personnel man. Now, what a brain. Lovely man, too. Hard as nails. And he was sent down from Nottingham as personnel manager of Sturmey-Archer, sent down to Birmingham to effect all the redundancies, while Keep Brooks, which had 50 employees, so he's sacking 1,000, keeping 50 on, and he was given the job of doing that. And with it went a lot of stuff. And I tell you, the time, Peter Wittering, who was a no-nonsense kind of guy, we lost at that time not just the people, but he was so angry and upset and all the rest of it, he actually got rid of all the tools and a lot of the drawings, which was a tragedy now as I look back at it. What a heritage loss, because I see many people now reinventing these damn things. So very sad times, actually, and tough times in the 80s.
Yes.
And, I mean, we were working day and night those days. I remember in 85, we had to keep Sturmey-Archer going. It was tough. By this time, Shimano had become even more strong. Fichtel and Sachs were big too in Europe. Shimano were running out. So our markets were being really hit, and I was in charge. I knew all the customers very well by this time. And so we had to really compete with Shimano. And there had been investment in Sturmey-Archer over the years. Really, in the early 60s, they weren't so stupid, some of these people in those days there in manufacturing, because they knew that they had got a clever design. When Mr. Sturmer and Mr. Archer got together, they knew that this epicyclic gear was clever and suited cycling. And if you remember, in the late 50s, it was really the time of plastics. So what do you want? You want strength with lightness.
Yes.
Plastics, clever. At the same time, too, you had tolerances and finishes that were a different order. Sintering, powder metallurgy. I can't remember the amount, but TI invested an enormous amount into powder metallurgy, the sintering plants, where you could, it was like baking a cake. You put in your carbon, you put in your steel, rattled it all together, pressed it out, and the finish you got was brilliant, absolutely bright. And, it would, when it came out from all this, it would snap. It's like that, and you had to then put it into hardening. But the great thing about sintering was when you did a lot of press work, you'd get a bit of metal and punch it. The weaknesses obviously would be around where they're bent. When you got sintering, of course, you could control the molecular structure of your steel so that you didn't have these weak points in it. The only trouble was it was expensive. We were using Höganäs steel from Sweden and things like that. So, of course, the ingredients were expensive. The technology, and the machines and so on weren't cheap. And the other thing, like with plastics, once you'd got the tooling and the infrastructure, boy, oh boy, could they knock out thousands. So you had to have volume. Yeah. And it was very volume related, of course. And some of the presses we bought, these 1,000-ton Komatsu presses, if you weren't making sort of 5,000 shells a day, you weren't getting the return on the machines. Well, we'd had that investment in Sturmey-Archer, not in Phillips, because that's why I said the merger had worked against down there. And Factory 3, it was known in Raleigh, was the Sturmey-Archer factory, so it's easily divided. They had its investment in the 60s. The awful thing was that, sadly, plastics and powder metallurgy, the plastics didn't really do the job in the end, so we ended up having to do something with those very expensive machines. I mean, £60,000 at the time a tool, plastics moulding tool would cost, and powder metallurgy was just too expensive for going into a cocoa tin at the back of a bike retailing at £100. And so this terrific technology had developed in Sturmey-Archer, and very sensibly, and at the same time too, Peter Wittering, who was an engineer, had got our own tool room. Now, our tool room was probably the best tool room in the East Midlands, and some very clever people we had at Raleigh too. I mean, we were talking about not just degree but chartered engineers and degree, and lovely lads. I mean, quite humble too, which was, they didn't know their own value. What I mean by humble, they wanted to live in Nottingham, and they didn't look elsewhere. They got a secure job. brainy people. We had a lot of those in Sturmey-Archer, and I got to appreciate them, A, as people, because they're so well educated in their field, and secondly, they were doing such a vital job. And it was such hard work because we had to get, as I said, this huge volume with a type of engineering that wasn't totally suitable to the product we were fitting it in. So we developed then Engineering Components Division, where we sold to the automotive trade.
Right.
And that became very important. Oh, with our chromium plating plant, that was second to none. Fabulous chromium plating plant we had. And the quality of our chromium plating was better than that on cars.
Right.
It was very, very high quality.
Because you were making cam belt pulleys and bits for washing machines and things like that, weren't you?
Because the top of the Creeder cooking machine, I think that was all made by Sturmey-Archer.
Yeah.
Lots of, it was huge, the number of products we were in. So it wasn't just the automotive trade.
No.
But of course, what happened in the late 70s, early 80s? The motor industry declined. The Creeder cookers went down. They were all importing. And of course that hit, that side then was tough on Sturmey-Archer. And a lot of our technology was too expensive from the hubs. No, it was actually tough times. Do you know, I remember in Christmas 1983, I had to, Peter Wittering said to me, John, we won't be making a single hub for 2 months over Christmas. I want you to get all the orders in. We're going to make them in advance, and we are going to lift every machine in the place. We're going to go into half the size of the factory. This is after all the redundancies. Half the size of factories. We know what we want to be in, and we're going to dig up the machines, replace them, and start again. And he said, but to do that, and the boys worked, they were working right through Christmas. There was no Christmas holiday given to any of them. And it was actually quite exciting in a way, because you were out, with a purpose. You were keeping people's jobs. You knew all of them very, very well.
Yes.
And gosh, to get people to commit the orders. Yes. And we did it, and they worked it up. We went into half of the space in 92 we were in previous to that, and we decided we had fields of these wonderful multi-station lathes. You've probably seen them. As far as the eye could see were these hundreds of lathes. And they weren't bad machines. I mean, we kept a lot of that, and we'd got some new plant in, completely redid it to the rebirth, as we'd hoped, of Sturmey-Archer. This was in 1984.
Because I suppose by that time you were getting rid of things like magnetics and so on.
I mean, the GH6 hub was invented, 1935, I think.
George Rawlings of Kenilworth.
It's a pleasure to be with you. I have to be careful what I say. But yes, clever, sort of simple designs. And I mean, still the epicyclic gear's not been beaten. At this stage, too, Raleigh wasn't fitting in dyno hubs. They were fitting these dreadful things that go on the side of your wheel. I mean, rubbish. Whereas they had on site, much in the braking systems. Now they've redeveloped it, with their internal expanding hub brakes. Very, very effective and efficient braking systems. The Dutch, our biggest market was Holland. They understood cycling. Raleigh didn't anymore. So a lot of infighting, and because they weren't fitting the best, they weren't giving the best to their customers. And we were making them, but for a very much smaller audience. And my job, my life became from being much involved with around the world and overseas factories and what have you. I was very much involved with Sturmey-Archer with America that came fairly well, and Europe. Because, and in fact, it became more and more to Holland.
Because you were actually badge engineering Sun Tours hubs, weren't you?
I was directly involved in that.
It was kept very quiet at the time, I think.
And thank heaven it was, but it was wonderful to do it, because still the enemy was Shimano, and Sun Tour had the chief executive there, Junzo Kawai, a remarkable man I hope he's still alive. I met him a couple of years back at Eurobike, to the Taipei show, where he was still the consultant. Very wise, clever man. And we didn't treat him that well, actually, to start with. But he had tried to make the 3-speed hub, realised what was involved, and came to us and to make it, and we didn't trust him at all. I used the royal we, and I went out to Japan and had some very interesting meetings with him, and in the end we did make his Sun Tour hubs to compete with Shimano, because Shimano were frightened at the growth in those days of Sun Tour, and they were coming to all sorts of fields encroaching on them, and Shimano fight to win.
Yes.
And they, stamped out people as Shimano did to us, Sturmey-Archer. They got up to all sorts of tricks in America, I can tell you.
Yes.
People tend to forget now that Suntour were the ascendant company for a long time because they had that patent on the slant parallelogram, and their derailleurs shifted better than anybody else's.
Absolutely.
Yes. Their engineer there was Takimoto-san. Takimoto was the one who had developed that, and he's since developed some other things, but to do these things outside a brand name also makes you appreciate what people like Moulton and Andrew Ritchie have done, because when you're not got an umbrella under which you can make mistakes, we had tried to make this hydraulic braking systems, disc brake hubs, but disc brake with hydraulics. Magura then started making them, and of course Sturmey-Archer had all these designs and thought. But they were, in a sense, too efficient at the time. I mean, when you first started, in fact, I think in 2015, there's been a lot of recalls with the disc brakes because they're either on or they're off. And when they're on, you go over the wheel, over the head.
Yes.
But getting that fading was the
Modulation.
Modulation, yes. But I remember being involved in that and all the maths of the boys working out how to get this fade, as I call it, modulation correctly. But Sturmey-Archer did a lot of work at the time with that, and then, as you said, working with Suntour was terrific. I could have seen a big alliance with Suntour in different days.
Then you had the departure of TI.
For me, that was very sad. I liked TI for many reasons. They left in 1987. I liked TI for many reasons. They were very ethical. You knew where you stood with them. You had opportunities within TI. We were then bought out. It was then sold, actually, by the new managing director of TI. One of the first things he did before he accepted the job was to sell Raleigh in total. He sold Raleigh to his personal lawyer, Ed Gottesman. And Ed Gottesman brought in his hired hand, who'd worked for BTR, Alan Finden-Crofts, to run the thing. And Ed Gottesman was very bright. He was an American Jew living in London, wasn't he? He didn't have a Japanese valet, I think. Anyway, clever man, no doubt about it. But I remember being told, now I don't know how true this is, but I remember being told, sort of learning how, coming into a different world. I'd been in the world of making things, design, manufacture, exporting, knowing the ins and outs of it all. A very clean world in its way, and getting round sort of government sort of tariffs and trying to think of clever ways in which to operate in the countries. And by and large, it was absorbing, but it was straight. And then suddenly we got into the world of this was 87. We got in the world of people thinking tax, money. And it was quite different. And I was told, I think, after a year that Raleigh, of course, with their losses or whatever, didn't have to pay any tax. But throughout the world, they were busy not paying tax anywhere. And I was told we had something, I'm sure I'm wrong on them, 160 internal loans. So if you have different year endings intercompany, you can often invoice and
revolving credit and all that,
and that sort of thing, so that you would if we declare this, we have to pay tax on it and so forth. Now I never got involved in that world, but it was a completely different world, and I got educated then into this. Secondly, they set the companies up differently. So what they did was they made the people running their companies, they made accountability. Now we were all accountable, we were absolutely in our jobs, but they gave accountability to one person. That person had to literally buy his job back. So Peter Wittering, who'd been a very effective managing director of Sturmey-Archer, suddenly had to become a shareholder of Derby. And to do that, now most of these lads that were there hadn't got any wealth behind them, earned a good salary, but whatever salary is, you tend to spend it, and they suddenly had to buy their jobs, and so they had to fork out 100 grand to buy their job. But then, they were made accountable and their job was on the line. So effectively for running it, and if you were running it from Whitehall, literally, in this case here, you just wanted to speak to one man. And so there was one man in Raleigh America, one man in Gazella, one man in Kalkoff or Derby Cycle Worker, one man in Sturmey-Archer, one man in Raleigh, one man in Raleigh Malaysia, all the country, one man in Raleigh Nigeria. So you had, they maybe had 8 key men. Plus Alan Finden-Crofts, plus Ed Gottesman, and maybe an accountant or two, and that would be the board. But everybody else tended to become nobodies. So you weren't a shareholder, TI allowed you to have their share option scheme, all finished. TI had a pension scheme. No, different days. And I liked TI. I liked the way in which they worked. And then it probably did me good because I had to get up with the modern world as it is nowadays. But we've lost a lot. So yes, they were. And I carried on in Sturmey-Archer for a while, and until actually its demise, which was in 1996-7 or something like that. And Peter retired, and they got we were bought out by Americans, and a disastrous little episode by the managing director of Diageo, Gary Matthews came in, one of the brightest men I've ever met in my life. Very, very clever man, intellectually. Total disaster. And I think he went away with £500,000 for failing. Yeah. But, awful these times in business at that time. And you certainly had to grow up. And it was then that I started to develop, for survival, sort of my other interests, my interest in Burma, my interest in trading. And, of course, then when Sturmey-Archer, it didn't go bankrupt, but it went to liquidation because it was bought out, and all of our pensions, we lost it because the American companies that bought it, they had been taking a management fee. And
the Lennart company that got hold of it stripped all the money out of the accounts and basically did a runner, didn't they?
Literally a runner. We went down to London because we couldn't pay the salaries that month, and they'd not paid a farthing in. Met one of the Lennart people and refused to leave the room until we got the money, and said we'd go to the bank with him. He said, right, gentlemen, he said, if you give me a couple of hours, I'll be back. I'll just go down to the banks and organise this. And he went to Heathrow. Yeah, and
unbelievable.
We had no money to pay salaries.
Yes. Yeah.
A scandal. And then all the wonderful politicians were going to have an investigation into it. It was a Maxwell type event, but because we weren't owned by, at least Maxwell, I suppose, was semi-British. And 3 months later, it was all forgotten, and some of the personal tragedies continue to this day. I mean, I'm in touch with many of the people and their circumstances. I listen to people get very upset about pensions. All the people who work in civil servants type jobs, school teachers, they don't know how well they are off. Actually.
I mean, what is particularly shocking about it is that it was almost completely unreported. I mean, to their credit, and I'm not a great fan of the Daily Mail, but the Mail and the Mail on Sunday were, I think, the only newspapers who covered it at all. But the BBC, the ITV, none of the other companies, none of the newspapers even reported it as far as I could see.
No, the local MP did quite a bit too. I can't remember his or her name, actually, and tried to keep it alive. Tony Blair was involved. But, it was truly shocking. As I said, and the consequences of that are still felt by many individuals today, and I've kept in touch with them. And, they're still great people, but their financial circumstances are absolutely appalling.
Yes.
For all the years they put in and added to the balance of payments of Britain and all of this. It was a war we fought.
Yes.
Yeah.
And very quietly in the background of all that, in that confusion, you got involved with Brooks, did you not?
Well, it was so sad seeing Sturmey-Archer go. At the end of the day, that the epicyclic design still can't be beaten today. Steve Rickles, a design engineer, had designed a 7-speed true epicyclic gear. That got a range of 278 degrees, like an 18-speed derailleur with proper steps in between, all made in Nottingham. Very, very smart and clever. All designed by him. And, of course, all that went over to Taiwan. He designed the 8-speed, which they're just getting into manufacture now, 15 years after the design. And Steve Rickles, I'm pleased to say, got a job with Andrew Ritchie in Brompton. Yeah. Super. Because exceptional brain, one of those British brains that we're so proud of. He was one of them. His wife teaches maths at Nottingham University. Bright family. These gems you meet here. But I'm so proud to know them, actually. But you talk about me being having a low profile. These people have got zero profile. Super people, and they were the core of our engineering.
Yes.
So yes, we a lot was lost. And
tell us a little bit about what you did with Brooks then.
Well, when I couldn't at the time, I thought this is crazy. I saw there was a buyout going to be done, and I could see what was happening. Brooks, the situation of Brooks is very interesting. It's in a place called Downing Street in Smethwick, and it's by a canal and by a fork in a road. It's got a very good position. Of course, it would be ideal, I think, for development. And I saw suddenly that I couldn't have afforded to have bought Sturmey-Archer, and it was also too big for me to contemplate in any way, but Brooks was certainly off a side. By this time, too, when the demise of Sturmey-Archer was in sight, I'd put some money into Pashley. And I did it because A, I'd got on very well with Adrian Williams, and B, I thought, well, if I'm leaving the bike industry, it's a shame after all these years, it would keep an interest in it. So I didn't intend to get operationally involved, but I put a small share in, 25%, and I bought them. And when Brooks came up, I thought, well, there is some synergy here with Pashley. We could run it with accounts and all the rest. So I quickly got hold of Adrian and I said, look, I think we can buy this. It was being done. An offer was put up for it, and they were offering small beer, £500,000 for Brooks. And I thought, that's ridiculous for a brand name around the world. And I knew its value commercially. I didn't know its value in terms of its assets totally. I knew the factory inside out, and but I didn't know quite its value in terms of it was a new game to me. And it was a very exciting time because the people that were wanting to buy it was a small group that obviously also recognised it had something, and we were involved in the end in a contract race. And I can tell you, I didn't go to bed for a week. That week when we had it, literally I was up there and had the phone on and all the rest of it, and we had people going down there, and our bids had to be in on the Thursday night or something. And I raced over at the beginning of the week to see Ricardo Bigolin, which I know very well from Selle Royale. And I said, Ricardo, I've got a chance to buy Brooks. Will you come in with us? It'd be good to have a component manufacturer. And he, charming man, he said to me, John, no. But I said, I won't buy. I don't want to be a part of something which I'm not controlling. He said, but I'll tell you what, buy it. So get it for the best price you can. And whatever you buy it for, I will buy it from you at a higher price. Now, there's nothing more that actually, I've never told that story to anyone, but there's nothing nicer than when you buy something. It's not anyone can buy things. It's the other side of it that we don't do very well. Yes. And to know that I had that behind. And but I must say, I put that back in. I was just disappointed I didn't stomp up with the cash for us to buy it. And we came in and we bought it. I can't remember. It was under £1 million anyway. And we bought Brooks, lock, stock and barrel, and we won the contract race at the end of that week.
Yes. And as a result of that, we still have Brooks in the UK with British people employed in it.
I'm not blowing Adrian and my trumpet. We would not have done it if we hadn't have got that. And it's still in the UK. And what a success story that's been. And with more or less the same workforce that's there. Fantastic. And at the time, too, we got Gordon Nixon, I mentioned earlier. We made him general manager. A super brain and a very good businessman. But I don't think the Italians could handle a blind person, to be honest. I just don't think they could take it. And secondly, a gutsy person who had no time for idiots. And he was very, very bluntly spoken. And when these Italians, and they did, come up with stupid ideas, he would come out in beautiful Geordie accent. He was a Geordie, putting them in their place. I used to love it. And they got rid of him. But anyway, no, it's been a huge success story. And, we keep close to Brooks, and we're very proud to have been associated. And they've been very good to us. We know the Selle Royale people very well. And, certainly it was a happy sale because it did need, we had it for 2 years. And we honestly knew that it needed more cash and more time. And we really didn't have that, either of those commodities, because the components business, as I found from Sturmey-Archer, although Raleigh did everything, was vertically integrated, the components industry is a separate type of business, actually, and it's a different mentality. And the seat business is different again in itself. It is quite a closed shop around the world. All the saddle manufacturers fight, love and hate each other, and so on. But it's a different world, and it needed that concentration, I had no doubt. Yes. So we sold it.
Yes. And meanwhile, you were doing other things with Raleigh.
Well, yes, I didn't know what I was going to do with myself, and I was sent by Gary Matthews on an extraordinary exercise, and I did it. He sent me to Shanghai to do a joint venture. Now, having been overseas a lot of my life, I'm not a fan of joint ventures. I wasn't then, but he was not a man. He was so bright. He was cleverer than everybody else. He knew it all. And anyway, at the time, I didn't want to get made redundant, so I took this job, and we set up a joint venture. it never happened, and he lost his job first. But I'd had 9 months in Shanghai, which was very interesting because although I'd first went there in 1948, but although I'd been to Shanghai, I spent time getting to know somewhere like that, and the buzz of the new China was very valuable. So when I was out there, I then had, I met at the, I think it was at, again, a Taipei show. I had the pleasure of really getting to know Philip Darnton very well, and got on with him very well. I mean, a charming, highly educated man, very an interesting guy too, and good to go to dinner with. So he then said, look, the chappie who'd been running Raleigh International, Chris Handley, was retiring. Would I be interested? And so I joined Raleigh International. And that was, I think, in terms of Raleigh, in a rounded sense, Sturmey-Archer was full of adrenaline, shall we say, and frustrations and relief and all these emotions. I was young enough for that then. Raleigh before that had been sort of adventures of various sorts. But suddenly with Raleigh International, I had the chance to have my own little operation, and I was made the managing director of Raleigh International, which I loved. That was, I had 10, 11 years there. And I can truly say that it brought together a lot of my experiences, and it was enjoyable.
And did you, in this period, see a sort of change from collaborative ventures where you were investing to licensing brand names?
Totally another world, I'm afraid. It was no longer making and selling. 2002, I got the job in the year 2000, and 2002 Raleigh, of course, stopped manufacturing at all. The Raleigh name was just not appreciated by Raleigh because it was like, I hate to say this, but in some ways Raleigh had become a bit like the core of an apple. It had grown a bit mouldy, but the outside was still quite shiny. Well, I'd only ever worked on the outside bits, all the exports. I mean, Raleigh exported 70% of its production when I was there, and it was enormous. Raleigh's name was really a name bigger than bicycles. And the people that bought Raleigh Malaysia, for instance, started a bank called Raleigh because it was known for integrity. Yeah, it was boomy pictures and it didn't last, but they did. And so I knew that Raleigh had a huge name, but we'd lost all our exports because we weren't competitive. There was no question about it. We hadn't kept up after the luck and of the mountain bike. Really, by the late 1990s, and when Gary Math took over, there wasn't really any emphasis put on the innovation or the just keeping up to date with bicycles. Meanwhile, a lot of the Americans, the big names you read now, they had done just the right things. Yeah. And where had they gone? They had gone straight to Taiwan. So you saw the losses of people who were the giants of the business, like Huffy, Murray, Schwinn. All of those went down. My old customers, and I knew them all intimately. And it went to the new names, Trek being one that was a bit more, but certainly Cannondale and Specialised and Scott and all of these. But they had by this time gone out to the Far East and they had established routes. Yes. Many of those established routes trained by Raleigh, I should say, to add, because Raleigh America went out first. And people like Bill Kearns went and trained Merida and Giant, from whom they bought.
It is extraordinary. I think it's worth commenting for anyone who's under a certain age that the idea in 1990 that you would go into a British bicycle shop and buy an American bicycle, I mean, they just were off the radar, and nobody would have even thought in Britain or Europe of buying an American bicycle. It was just something that it wouldn't even occur to you.
Let alone a Chinese bike. And now you're buying Bangladeshi bikes in the main, in the British market. No, it's a great sadness when one looks back. However, the world does move on, and my philosophy very much was that Raleigh had a brand name, but a brand name is I love brand names, and a brand name is something that it needs stroking every day because you can easily lose your brand name. I mean, Hoover lost its name, sadly, although you still talk about hoovering your room. Yeah. And so what wonderful things they've done. Raleigh, I think, is one of the best-known brand names in Britain. I think it's got something like a 95% recall. If you ask someone on the street to think of a bicycle, they will say Raleigh. So what an asset. But, not just in Raleigh, with all the places, certainly all of the Commonwealth, the British Empire places, Raleigh. In fact, when I went to Burma now, and Raleigh hadn't sold, I used to sell through Rowan Company when and it stopped in independence 1947. I went back in 1995, right by the Sula Pagoda there, on the sign there, was the old Raleigh sign. Everybody walked past this huge plate. It was something like 20 feet wide.
Gosh.
There, of Raleigh still up there. And Brooks made the B12, the biggest saddle. It was bigger than a B90 Throat 3 with all its springs, because apparently the biggest bottoms in the world were Burmese. Well, but these little details and knowledge, which certainly I had, and certainly it was easy to plug into. So for me, I had to do two things. One was to get Raleigh International, the shape of it. And remember, I was more or less on my own doing that. And then second, to expand it was terrific fun. I really did enjoy that, Tony. Yes. And it was, my life was... had a house in Nottingham, but I wasn't in Nottingham. And mentally, I wasn't in Nottingham at all, as many of my colleagues will tell you.
And you got to know an awful lot of personalities, key movers and shakers in all sorts of aspects of the bicycle industry around the world.
I think my Sturmey-Archer days did that really, getting to know the Schwinn family very well.
The Hons.
David Hon I knew from when he very first started, actually, when he came from the Howard Hughes engineering in Guangzhou in China. And then he came to Taiwan, and when he set himself up, I was one of the first people he met. So I kept in touch with him for the rest of his life and knew all his family and all the sadnesses that's happened with Josh and Florence and his wife and so on. But and I knew all the Japanese through my connections with Sun Tour, and I got to know the Shimano brothers, the three that really put him on the maps, Shozo Keijo and who was the Shozo, and Yoshi, of course, the financial guy. He's the only one alive now. I got to know them well. I got to know the Sachs people well. Gosh, I could tell you stories about Schweinfurt and Herr Kronar, Dr. Kronar, and Schwerdhofer. Was it Dr. Schwerdhofer? They have to remember their titles. But I was very lucky, so I got to know the last stages of what I call the real industry. In Saint-Étienne, because Saint-Étienne in France was like Nottingham was to the bicycle industry. I remember going and ordering a steak there, and I had the stupidity of ordering a steak, and they said, "How do you want it done?" I said, "I'd like it well done, please." And the chef, the waiter said, "Beefsteak jaune d'arc pour l'anglais." He shouted. Sorry, these memories flood back, don't they? You forget everything really too when you get older, but sometimes. But I'd been to Saint-Étienne. I think I visited with Sturmey-Archer every single bicycle manufacturer in Germany, of which there were about 30. Literally all round the whole of it. Certainly in France I did that, and in Italy with the Tagliabue family, who were kings there, so from Cicla-Cinzia to Torpedo to Bianchi. But I went to every manufacturer, I would think, in Europe, and certainly every manufacturer in America. We were members of the Bicycle Manufacturers Association of America. I'd set up Sturmey-Archer in West Chicago prior to this anyway, and we were members of the BWDA. Sturmey-Archer was, so I was meeting all the people, on their wonderful weekends they have in America, so very privileged. And then latterly, of course, more and more with the Far East.
And then eventually you did finally leave Raleigh.
I was going to leave when I was 65 in 2008. I was going to leave roughly then, and Alan Finnencroft basically said, "Look, I'm going to sell the company, John. Would you mind stopping on until it's sold? But find a successor." And of course, 2008 happened in all senses. It was not a good time to be selling a business, so we held on. And gosh, the next thing I knew, I'd held on, and it was 2012 when I left, actually. So I was quite late in leaving. Also, the successor that I found, super guy, trained him up, and he was really going very well. So much so that he's now was offered a job by Rolls-Royce, and he's got a very nice job with Rolls-Royce. So lost him. But then, in the middle of 2012, when the Dutch came, Axel came, and they wanted to do things quite differently. They took over then, and they said to me, would I just stay on for the 6 months? A lot of people stopped in July, and I stopped at the end of the year. And now the Raleigh International's headquarters is in Switzerland. Yeah. So I missed out there as well. Yeah.
And, of course, Sturmey-Archer's European headquarters are in the Netherlands. We don't have an office in this country at all, do we?
No, but funnily enough, I take pride in that because working with Alan Clark, who's heading that up, he used to work for me, of course, and we worked together for many, many years. It really always was commercially in there. Number one, in our days, one of the first things we did, long before euros were thought of, we were invoicing throughout Europe in guilders. Much stronger than the Deutschmark, rather not stronger, but much more consistent It
Stronger than the pound as well.
Oh, that was the key
that
thing.
applies to
So
most
we were
currencies.
yes. So we were always invoicing guilders, which meant that we were getting profits on exchange, which actually was a bad thing because it didn't make the people back in Nottingham realise just how uncompetitive they were becoming. But that's another story. But yes, so secondly, we held no stock in Sturmey-Archer. Stock is evil, but if workforce gets to see stock, they notice, our stock's going up, jobs are on the line, they slow down, productivity is affected. You couldn't even get a sample hub out of Sturmey-Archer. We used to have the whole lot in Holland, not necessarily in Sturmey-Archer, the warehouses there, but we used to have it in warehouses. And it was in the market. And they were then, as it ought to be, the responsibility of the commercial side. And so it really became our headquarters. It was the headquarters slowly and gradually for whole of Europe, but Holland was our most important market, when Germany was also reporting into with Sudbrack family, who were manufacturers of bikes in Germany in my day, and but Horst Sudbrack was the agent, and so it was always the headquarters really from about Sturmey-Archer started 1952 in Holland, out of Westerhoek, and started out from Fongers. Anyway, certainly when I got involved with Ray Bakewell in it there, it was Sturmey-Archer Europa, I think that was when out of Westerhoek, and then Brian Powdrell, you might remember, he was out there. And then I came on eventually in 1976, and yes, so it was very much the centre of Sturmey-Archer then, and so it's become since.
So you finally left Raleigh, and then rather than just retiring and living a life of leisure, you got more involved with Pashley and its associated operations.
Yes. Well, it's been a real delight. I mean, what a lucky fellow. I'd known Alex from 1967, I think. Gosh. And I'd got to know him through the Centenary Club runs that we would go on, and the club dinners and so forth, and always got on with him extremely well. I mean, he was not only charming, but always interesting. I used to come and spend weekends sometimes down in the halls with him. He would say, what are you doing this weekend? Come down.
I suppose we should point out that we're sat in his office here at Bradford-on-Avon, the Moulton offices.
With him looking down at us. His portrait is behind me. Very much so. No, it's extraordinary. And I can blame Adrian Williams for this, because I did not intend to work full-time. Yes, he asked me if I would get involved, and I didn't realise what getting involved meant. But you can't just put your toe into the bicycle business. It's total immersion, or not at all. But it was a pleasure because I knew Alex. I would have found, I think, it quite difficult to have worked either with him or for him. So I was spared that, and as a result, had a happy relationship with him most of the time. We did have our run-ins, as you heard, but you know, I had a very lucky relationship, and a very good one. And you know, it was sad because he died, of course, just at the time when I started. It was sort of sad, but in terms of working, it certainly made it easier, because I know, as you probably heard, the 101 stories in the factory here where you're sitting, and the stories about Alex. And one of the things we had when Pashley bought Moulton in 2008, one of the biggest problems we had was he would come wandering down to the workforce and say, Timmy, I'd like you to clean the Bentley, please. Or, Timmy, I've just knocked up these drawings in the tool room. Would you know? And, of course, we were paying Timmy.
Yes.
And he was still busily driving his Bentley or developing some new product, which was wonderful, and getting it knocked up here. Or if he wanted something doing, I mean, our assembler there, when I didn't realise this, but Michael, who's our assembler there and lives in one of the cottages, he was the one that did all the meals. I never saw him. And they would all be put in these silver trays, and they would appear suddenly. And it was Michael making them all from the factory. Now, we, of course, were paying Michael. Alex never paid him. But a lot of these tales have come out since, so it's been great fun. So I was lucky not to have to argue with Alex in terms of walking down to his stables and seeing his men not working for him.
Just to clarify the situation, as I understand it, you own a quarter of Pashley in round terms, and Adrian owns the other three quarters. That's about it, isn't it?
Yes. No, it was a management buyout, and Adrian, who came from the aeronautical world, helicopters in Yeovil, Business Westlands, he did a management buyout of Pashley initially. And funny enough, it was a colleague of mine in TI days, another graduate trainee in my day, that had 25%. Yeah. And it was just a thing when Norman Price, his name was, and I said to Norman when I came in, look, I'm going to be leaving the bike industry. And he said, well, look, I'll be very happy if you took this off my shoulders, and I have to say I paid him pound for pound, which was far too much. But there we are. Yes, so I got involved, and really it's been important. Just moving on to Moulton. Of course, Moulton exports 90% of its production. There's two things about that. One, I have to say, I came here thinking I could help, thinking my wonderful export experience would be of value. I think I can say unproudly that I've not succeeded in being any help whatsoever. I've had people visit here from all around the world, but Moulton isn't really in the bike business as we're presently structured. So I've had people come in absolutely fascinated, spend 2 or 3 days here, get totally intrigued, can see why I'm doing the job, but have turned around and to a man that I haven't got one of my old contacts that has turned around and taken up Moulton. Which is making me think now, but secondly, it's been a big disappointment because I've not been of any help there at all. But equally, I hope I've been of help because we're still in a in-between situation with the hall. It was left by Alex to a charitable trust, and that's not played itself out yet. So to get a general manager to come in properly and to handle this when we haven't necessarily got security of tenure would be wrong. So as a shareholder, it's quite useful an old boy coming in and holding. And hopefully it'll get resolved by, the course of this year.
Yes.
I haven't given up totally, Tony. I do think we've got to do some things with our product development to bring us more into the bike market. Selling jewels is fine. It is jolly hard work. And selling one is as difficult as selling 100.
Yeah.
And honestly, the amount of energy and time we spend with customers and with the product is out of all proportion to the turnover. Yeah. It's absurd, actually. When I reflect on it, it gets to me as a shareholder. Moulton has got a very clean name, I'm pleased to say, and it's wonderful where you see in Japan how strong that name is. Now, it's not known now in England anymore, and that irks me a bit. So there's something we've got to do about that. And in Japan too, it's now 35 years we've been with Dynavector, and they were just saying to me the other day, really, we need to see Alex has died, what's next? And although we've done a heck of a lot, it's like winking in the dark, because we've had a whole other chapter of a book to redesign and so on of things, but we haven't come out with something that's put somebody else's stamp on it.
Yeah.
That now is overdue. So before I bow out, two things. I hope that the whole will get resolved in a good way so that we have got security of tenure. I hope, too, that we can keep Bradford-on-Avon as where the DNA of Moulton is, where we can keep control of Moulton in terms of crafting the bikes here, designing the bikes here, and then if we have to subcontract, at the moment we're subcontracting to Pashley, but maybe we need to extend that a bit if we're going to start getting down into the names without losing any of what... And I've learned from Raleigh here, without losing its brand in any way and keeping control of it. So you've got to control its design and you've got to control its quality.
Yeah.
And if you can succeed in those two ends and put that stamp of Britain on it, that's just a nice to have. But people don't pay a penny extra for it.
It's very analogous with the way in which Scotch whiskies are branded and sold. The individual experience of a location, a tradition, a backstory, and that sort of thing.
Isn't that lovely of you to say? I quite agree with you. Actually, we are so lucky to have that. And to keep that is absolutely essential for the future of Moulton. And what a unique spot too in Britain. I didn't know the Southwest 3 years ago. I know it quite well now. And yes, not only a story, but it's a mecca. And if the hall goes the way I want it to do, I think we can make it even more of a mecca. But it's premature yet to talk.
Yeah. We will see. The story continues. John, we could talk for days. You've got so much knowledge and so many stories and so many interesting views, but thank you very much for talking to us.
Well, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you.